Peter, just want to say thanks again so much for jumping on with us. It's a super exciting time right now, especially, with COVID. More and more people are trying to get into tech or try and come up with these different solutions to help solve all of these like bigger problems that we're now seeing with COVID just starting. And I'm sure you probably noticed a similar thing in your industry. And so what we want to do is we just kind of want to chat with you and basically just give our listeners a little more insight on really what it takes to go from nothing to what I would call an established tech company. Okay. And I think you are the perfect person to bring on for this because you've done it. You've been a part of the whole process.
For sure.
But before we jump into what Databox is, tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Sure. So I am a chemical engineer by degree. I did engineering out of school for a little while, and then the internet kind of popped up in the late 90s and decided I'd go back and learn how to code. So I did that. I did like a intensive 9-month program. And then started my first startup in 2000, actually. Not the best time to start an internet startup. It's actually a SaaS company, a software as a service company, before they used to refer to them as software as a service.
It was a SaaS company before SaaS, huh?
Yeah, exactly. It was a web-based app that helped people actually handle event registration and event promotion. So we did that. I did that for a few years. I'm trying to remember, maybe 6 or 7 total. In the beginning, it was nights and weekends while I was still employed as an engineer. We kind of struggled. We were real young guys. It was 4 of us and 2 of us full time. We paid the bills, but barely. And then came along and got an introduction to Mark Roberge, who was VP of sales at HubSpot at the time, and ended up joining HubSpot as 15th employee. HubSpot is now a public company with $1 billion in revenue. And so I stayed there for 9 years, ended up starting out their channel program, which is basically marketing agencies that use and resell the product, which accounts for about 40% of HubSpot's revenue at this point. And I did that for quite a number of years. Company got big, and I'm an entrepreneur at heart and wanted to kind of do it again, but as the boss again, like I was in my first startup. So I ended up, was going to start something, met with a handful of seed stage investors, and ended up getting connected to the founder of Databox, one of the co-founders of Databox, Davron Gabrovic. Interesting story there. They had raised a bunch of money and built some technology, got a handful of really big customers that then canceled about a year or two in. But they had raised a bunch of money in the meanwhile, built out a team, and then just really were unable to go to market. And so they were in the process of pivoting from an enterprise market more towards an SMB market. And that would fit well within my experience at HubSpot. They were also kind of pivoting more towards marketing. Or selling to marketers. So obviously it was a real good fit. And after a handful of conversations, decided for me it would be a little bit shorter path to what I wanted to get to by joining a company with an established engineering team. At the time, they had 12 people, 11 of which were engineers and product people. And so I kind of came in and we've built the company up. We're now about 2,200 customers, a little over 4 million in revenue, annual revenue.
Wow.
That's my background.
That's awesome. So it's funny because we're really familiar with HubSpot. We've used HubSpot. All my companies I've worked at have used HubSpot.
Oh, cool.
So I know HubSpot. It's a great company. And so I'm curious, what did you take from HubSpot? Obviously you said you were in kind of ground level, first 15. They blew that company up. You saw the growth between HubSpot to where it was. What are some of those things that you kind of like learned? Like you kind of saw like, I could take this somewhere else.
Way too many to fit into an hour. I look back on it, and at the time my startup was struggling. So one of the reasons I joined HubSpot was for a consistent income. So that's kind of the decision I was making at the time. And, it could have been any other startup really. And it could have completely failed and had a different story to tell. So, and like I learned so much from the management team there and the board members there and people I hired and worked with. I don't even know where to begin in terms of what I learned, but I could say that I often say like I had a startup and it failed and I learned a lot from that. And I joined a successful startup and learned a whole lot from that. So I don't know if you could be more specific, but
I'm just curious. Just that's honestly that's the perfect answer. It's just like, listen, I went from one place where we were struggling to now that I went to this really successful thing, and you just absorbed everything, what it sounds like.
Yeah. So HubSpot, I think HubSpot's still a great place to work. It's rated as one of the best companies to work for in the U.S. There's still a lot to learn there. But I think one of the reasons why it's such a great place to work and was a great place to work is how transparent we were about everything. Like, just to give you a feel for it, when we did go public, we declared every employee an insider. Because every employee knew how the business was operating down to the P&L. We didn't know each other's salaries. That wasn't shared proactively, but we knew pretty much everything else about the financial performance of the company, about the strategy of the company, and everything. So I think that's one of the big things I learned, is that transparency in a company really creates an ownership mindset. And the reason I think that is because people feel like they're learning so much. And they feel like they have an influence over the company, and they feel like the better they do, the more they can earn in terms of promotions and responsibility and compensation. So I think that's one of the things we've tried to duplicate here at Databox.
That you've got to move. And it's funny, I've actually worked for a company who did. They shared how much was in the bank account. They shared profits and loss, burn rates, things like that. And it makes you feel like you have a sense of ownership. You're a part of something, which is something cool that you brought to Databox. So let's talk about Databox. For our listeners who might not know what Databox is, let's talk about what Databox is and what service and what problem you're overcoming in the market.
Yeah. So our mission is to help regular people use data to find insights and take action inside companies, of course. Very practically speaking, what we do is we help companies get a complete view of their performance across teams, across tools, by connecting with a large number of software tools and pulling the performance data out of it so that they can then use that data however they want to monitor it. So if they want to monitor it on their desktop, of course, we enable that, but also mobile, TV. You can also set up alerts, goals, scorecards that get sent to you by email or Slack. So it's really about creating a culture inside of a company where data is pretty much omnipresent and, to the degree that you want to, transparent across the organization, so that everybody knows what they're responsible for and can optimize for that on a daily basis.
Yeah, Databox is a super cool tool, and I had a brief interaction with it when, I don't know, it was like me and some other person, we were thinking about basically building, it was some random startup at the time, but it had a lot to do with data. But it's super crazy because every company has all these different forms, like Google Analytics and I don't know, Facebook Analytics, like all these, or HubSpot too, just all these different things in terms of analytics, and really trying to visualize all of them separately is super hard. And so what you guys do in terms of making it easier is just night and day, super helpful and super insightful. It's a really cool tool. Cool. And so tell us a little bit about how, like, what the start of Databox looked like. So how early did you get in? Were you so early from like the validation of the product standpoint, or did you come on a little bit later?
So putting aside the first attempt where the team, had some success, but then didn't scale it. If we put that aside, then yes, I was involved with the initial validation of the product and, selling the first few accounts and onboarding them and figuring out how to get more of them and all of that. So when I joined, like I said, it was all engineering team and one support person. And so I had to figure out how to do sales marketing and kind of onboarding, customer onboarding. And so I did that for like a month or two all myself, and I think, maybe closed 20 or so customers and got 10 or so of them to the point where they were happy and successful. And then, when I had joined, I had raised an additional funding, and there was some funding in the bank still from the initial raise. And so I ended up hiring two people, one to help me with marketing and one to help me with customer onboarding. And I continued to do the sales. About a year in, I think one of the guys that used to work for me at HubSpot ended up joining in a sales capacity. And so there was 4 of us for a while. We're now 73 people. And I think 8 in marketing, 8 in sales, and like 20 or so in support between customer and technical support. So I've seen that whole evolution.
And I'm curious on what made the difference when you came in from before. Did the product change, or was it just the way it was
So I can't
executed?
take credit for a lot of that. The team, first of all, had built a cool product initially. They just didn't have the right go-to market path for it. And then before I joined, right around the time I started talking to the founder, they pivoted to a freemium model where users can basically sign up and try the product and use the product forever under a certain level of usage. And they had started doing some marketing to get some signups. I had also introduced it to a few of people that I had worked with at HubSpot, specifically some marketing agencies that I'm really friends with at this point. And they kind of gave me feedback, and then I passed that feedback along, and they improved the product. They improved the integrations, a few of the marketing integrations, such as our HubSpot integration. And so there was an iteration kind of as I was joining and right after I was joining on the product in order to, find those first few customers and make them successful.
So you're basically, it was just kind of a go-to-market strategy you had to change a little bit.
Yeah, so they already had the freemium model. However, it wasn't a very good freemium plan. Like, it was basically you could connect one data source and build one dashboard, and the whole value prop of Databox is that you can connect multiple data sources and have multiple dashboards.
Yeah.
So it was more of a trial under a freemium guise. And so we switched it to a true freemium model. You could connect 3 dashboards and build three data boards, which is still limited, but enough for a lot of small businesses and
To
enough
see the
for
value.
companies to really see the value. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I changed. That was one change we made. We did work a lot on the integrations initially, because some of the integrations were light. And compared to our competitors now, we have way deeper integrations where we're pulling a lot more data, pre-building a lot of reports that people can just one click and kind of grab. And so we spent a lot of time. We continue to spend a lot of time on and effort on that.
So you continue improving that product then.
Yeah, like the hard part about this business, I'm not sure I would do it again, honestly, is that we have all these integrations that we've had to build and maintain, and we get requests for integrations like every day. We have I forget the exact numbers, but it's somewhere around a few thousand different systems that our customers have requested we build an integration with just over the last 6 months.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so there's no way for us to obviously build those. We're in the process of designing a system that can manage that, and have third parties build integrations. But up till now we've built every integration, and we maintain it. Meaning when an API changes from one of the providers, or when they launch something new, we'll add new metrics and new visualizations that are possible because of the new API. So it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. And just from like the development standpoint, just thinking about it, not only are you having to go in and build like your own integrations with all these different tools, but just like you said, maintaining them. Like, I feel like a HubSpot at any given point would just be like, yep, we're deprecating this API. You no longer have access to this, or just like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's less about deprecation, more about changes to it, rate limits. I don't know how much people understand, but sometimes software companies will let you pull data from their API, but then they'll limit how much you can pull in a certain period of time. And sometimes they'll have 4 different rate limits, like the number of pulls you can make in a second or a millisecond, the number of pulls you can make in a day. Sometimes there's the number of pulls that an individual account. So like if one of our customers connected their HubSpot account, there's a limit, but then there's also sometimes limits on how much data we can pull for all of our customers. So there's all of that complexity that we have to manage. And that's just one piece.
That's so over my head right now. I'm just
it's a lot. So let's kind of back up a little bit, because I would say the main people who listen to this are people are very, very early. And obviously you've got a ton of experience in startups and different things. And I think, a lot of things that people would misunderstand or not really realize how important it is. And you can probably even see this even now as a bigger company is specifically just like the validation piece. So I want to talk a little bit about validation, because in a bigger organization, I'm sure it's got to be a super big deal to try and prioritize a new feature or a new thing and actually get it in front of users and test before making a huge decision and putting a bunch of engineers behind it. So let's talk about what is typically your process before you bring in a new feature in a product, or what does a validation
or a new
look
integration?
Like? Or a new integration. What does that process look like at Databox?
I don't think I've ever said this publicly, but internally I talk about like feedback gathering is like a superpower of ours. We actually recently just launched a roadmap site. If, you can go to roadmap.databox.com and see it, where any user can suggest a new idea or vote for ideas. We also publish what we're planning to build, what we're in progress of building, and what recently just went live. That is how we do it now. We literally just launched that, I think, 6 months ago at max. And before that, we used to take every piece of feedback that a customer gave us, and that could be through chat, it could have been through a ticket, it could have been through a call, and we would log it in our project management system, Asana, and we would manually keep track of the votes. It sounds so stupid now that I say it out loud, and but that's kind of just the way the team manually operates. What's that?
I said a data company doing things manually.
Yeah, right. Yeah, not in an automated way. I like to do things. I usually say do something 30 times before you automate it, because you'll know whether it's worth automating and really you're automating it in the right way. There. But in this case, we probably did it about 30,000 times before we automated it. So anyways, we just have that DNA, and we literally look at everything by the number of customers that have requested it. And now it's a lot easier with the roadmap site. Our support team sometimes logs ideas if the user doesn't want to do it in there, but or we'll direct a user to log their idea. And then whenever somebody says, hey, I could really use this, and we already have it, we just point to them to vote for it. The nice thing about the voting is once they vote for it, they'll get notified when we move it to a production stage and when it's live. It helps us manage our beta testing as well for different integration, new integrations and things like that. So that's a big portion of it. We actually greenlit a really massive project about a year and a half ago, and it's consumed about 80% of our engineering resources since then. And right now it's consuming about 95% of our engineering resources.
Oh, geez.
As we get closer to the final stages. And it was really based on feedback from customers. It was one feature that they kind of just expected us to have in our product. And unfortunately, it was a feature that required us to rewrite almost our entire application and every one of our integrations.
Oh my goodness.
So it was a really difficult decision. At the time, we thought it would be like a 9-month project. So, once we got to about month 9 or month 6, when we realized it was longer, we kind of regretted the decision to some degree. But I don't regret it now at all. And because what it'll enable, the new architecture will enable us to do a whole lot more innovation as well. So
the way
I think for us, that was go ahead, Bodri.
I was just going to say, the way I look at it though, Peter, is you're allocating 95% of your development team, right? Your engineers to a feature. And what if that feature wasn't something that the people wanted, right? What if you didn't validate it before? Yeah. You literally could be throwing a ton of eggs and really expensive and not see just because you think it, right? That's why that validation is so important.
Yeah, we had hundreds of customers, if not more, ask for it specifically. Yep. And I think there's a 10-to-1 ratio of like, there's 9 people that aren't going to ask for it, but will use something if you got one, or not one that says they do. And so when you get 100, I feel like that's like thousands of people saying, hey, where is this? Mm-hmm. It's also something they're used to having inside of the source tool. So if you're in Google Analytics, you would expect this. If you're in HubSpot, you would expect this. And so not having it in our system really limited how much usage we could drive. We also had data to say that when users used something similar to what we're going to build in our app, that they would retain it a lot higher rate. And so, there were some selfish reasons to prioritize this one as well.
Well, I just think about how like it's such a big, expensive decision for the company. You just want to make sure you have all the data behind it to push it. Right. Yes, and a lot of times, I mean, I've worked for a company where we were pushing the wrong integrations. It eventually really hurt the company in the long run. Right. Because it wasn't.
Yeah, I think we actually are on the opposite side of that, of like prioritizing the things that our customers ask for and not prioritizing things that maybe would help us grow our business a little bit more or a little faster.
Well, and I feel like we should err on that side, right? Like if you can keep your customers happy, that's gonna prolong your company significantly longer because you have happy customers. Although the internal team might be working a lot harder, right? Because the tools aren't helping them. But at the same time, like I really think that if the customer's happy, you're going to buy yourself time.
Yeah, and that is kind of the way we looked at it, is like, hey, this is something we need in order to serve our existing customers. It's also something we know that our next 1,000 customers will want. And the added benefit of this project was that it'll enable us to innovate a lot faster going forward because we got rid of a lot of technical debt.
Oh, good.
And it'll also enable us to add new capabilities and features to the product that some customers expect, but also some new things that they probably won't expect, which I think will really wow people. So it wasn't just that one little feature. It was really a decision to just
A whole
refresh.
process.
No, that's super fun. And I think that's a good segue into like your developers. And so let's go back to I'm gonna say like version one because I'm all devy, I guess. Version one of the company. Did you do all of the development in-house, or were you guys like managing a team, like an external team at the time?
Yeah, all in house. The core team is from Slovenia. They had
Okay.
built. They did web like I did. They did web design in the early 2000s, and SEO, and kind of had a little agency. And then in the mid 2000s, they built another software company, or at least some of them built another software company. That's still going today. The founder, Databox, is the chairman of that company, but it was for the local market. And so the market in Slovenia is nowhere near as big as the U.S. or the world, of course. And the founder is just like a really driven guy. And so a few of them decided, hey, we're going to go to the US. They flew into San Francisco. They didn't even have an apartment figured out. And they're like, we're gonna try to get ourselves into an incubator. They ended up getting into
Awesome.
Techstars, but in Boston. So a few of them moved to Boston. The rest of them moved back to Slovenia. And they kept coding. Like they were living in an apartment together in San Fran and Boston, just like this small apartment, and coding all day. And working their butts off. When you get into Techstars, that's an intense program where you're basically writing code all day in a pretty short time frame, building out a product and pitching investors. And at the same time, they hustled and got their first 5 enterprise accounts, each paying about $100,000 a year. And then that's when they started, their fundraising process, and ended up raising 3.7 million seed stage.
That's so crazy.
That was all before me. Yeah.
We have a lot of founders or people who let's say early Databox, right? They're like, okay, how do we get this moving? What funded? I mean, how did they live? What funded the original start? Did somebody take an idea to an angel investor, and then angel investor's like, hey, I'll fund this to the beginning?
No, they literally flew to the United States and figured it out. They knew that they wanted to be here,
right?
And this is where it was. Yeah, they bootstrapped everything.
And they were all coders, right?
Yeah, they were all developers. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And they had a full
That
stack.
makes sense.
A handful of them that could do a full stack, everything from DevOps to front end.
Dude, that's
and
crazy.
All of them are still with the company. And
all of them?
driving all of them. And driving the product development decisions.
So for our listeners, if you want to make this business, you need to move to another state, if not another country. You need to find a team of developers, and you need to live in an apartment together, and you need to just go to work without any pay for the beginning.
Yeah.
I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it.
I don't like to generalize cultures, but I think in the Balkans, they're hardworking people. There's certain groups of people that are hardworking, and there's also people that don't work hard there. And I think this group of people here at Databox, very hardworking people, but the whole culture, I think, it just appreciates what they have more than we do here in the U.S. by far. And it might be a European thing in general, but yet they don't need much. They're focused on what they're doing. They love what they do. Like it's an amazing team. I could say many of those things about the HubSpot team, but I think at HubSpot in the US, people are very much about what's my piece of it and how do I optimize that. Whereas there, it's much more about the mission. And I'm at the stage in my career where if the mission isn't there, I'm not interested either. Yeah. So it's really a refreshing culture.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then so that was like the initial piece. And so now you've got this whole team, you're making a big pivot. And I would say a lot of people listening don't even have their initial core team of developers. And it sounds like you all live a very, what I would say, gun-ho like movement. Like you're all looking to make a big change, it change the product, change, the way people view data. Right. So what do you typically look for in a new developer as you're bringing them on? Because a lot of these founders have no idea where to start. with trying to find a developer or
Yeah, I
even a
actually
core
don't
team
do.
of
I'm
developers?
not involved in that hiring process. I hire for the rest of the company, and I am involved when you're hiring more senior people across the whole company. But yeah, I don't know that I'm the right guy to ask that question. We hire senior and junior engineers, so the experience really doesn't matter. Most of our engineering team, all of our engineering team, is geographically pretty tight, and so
Mm-hmm.
we're looking in this pretty small area. It's really about creating a culture, an engineering culture, where people feel like they're working on cool stuff, where they're constantly learning, where their peers are top notch, both in terms of their technical chops and belief in what they're doing and the mission and all of that, and, high quality of stuff. And the founder, it's really the founder drives this. He's
That's
Yeah.
the one
awesome.
that's built that culture.
Well, and culturally,
Um,
like that's really
yeah.
important. And I think that one thing we can take from everything you've said is like literally hard work drives results. And it kind of sounds
Yeah,
like that
yeah.
was
We
a big
actually
thing.
have we have like 6 core values, and don't ask me to name them without looking at the website again. But one of I know them by I know them if you bring up the topic. But one of them is like work and play hard, and it kind of embodies 3 things. Like we do work hard, but we don't kill ourselves, and we do have fun together. With COVID, it's been more difficult, of course, with travel
Yeah.
and all that, because a big portion of the team is remote. But we do like to play, and we do not want anyone to compromise outside, like their life outside of work. We want people to spend time with their family, friends, alone time, outside time, and so we do not push hard. We set reasonable targets, and I feel like it's up to me to set up a system, or my team to set up a system that allows people to be successful within reasonable amount of work. So I think when we do work, we're
Gosh, that's
focused and we're
amazing.
intense, and we do set some ambitious goals, but we also balance that with life. I think pretty well.
That's
Yeah.
culture right there.
In working with developers, just like in general, like I think there is a lot that goes into finding like the right team of developers and like building that culture. But I kind of tell us about the time, when you were initially scoping out this new feature, you said it was going to take 6 months. And then it turned around and turned out to be a year and a half. And I feel like that's a pretty common thing in development for timelines
Yeah.
to get pushed like that. But how did the company shift? What was like the reaction to that? How did you guys make that pivot?
Yeah, so it hasn't been. We, in fact, I just finished helping the founder kind of finish up a pretty long write up on the things we didn't do right and the things that we need to address in order to avoid that kind of a miss on a project deadline.
Yeah.
I don't think it was any one person's issue.
Yeah.
Just a systemic failure. I think the team was used to operating as a small team, and it just didn't scale as we both took on more people and took on an ambitious project, much more ambitious than we had in the past. And
Mm-hmm.
so, there's a lot of things around scoping projects, project management, communication,
Yep.
um, having enough, resources in project management and QA. Like, there's a lot of things that we didn't quite nail, and so we're addressing all those things. I'll say before that, we launched probably 10 or 20 features, of which
Mm-hmm.
we followed a very different process. They were all smaller
Yep.
features. Um, and they were usually complementary to something we already had, or something, on top of something. And so, or a tweak to something. And so, we would scope it out. We would
Mm-hmm.
wireframe it. We'd get validation from users, and then we'd build a minimum
Yep.
viable product. We'd look at usage. We'd improve it a bit. And so that process was much easier. I look forward to the time when we'll get back to that, which should be pretty soon.
Mm-hmm.
And that process is a lot smoother, a lot easier. So I don't know if I
Yeah.
answered your question, but
Well, no, I think you did like a great job, and the reason that I asked that is for a lot of these people listening, like that new feature you did, I would say is probably very similar to what these new founders are going through to launch a
for
brand new
sure,
product, right?
yeah,
Like you and your
depending on the
team, you had your
complexity.
own set of yeah, exactly. You and your team, you have your own set of processes, right? And after you had gone through and do it, now you're revising that process. Whereas these founders really had no process, and so for them, it's
Yeah,
taking like you basically got to start 6 steps ahead, where these guys are
yeah,
way at the beginning and are still trying to figure stuff out. And so I think actually taking the time to reflect and look back on that is like a super important like point to be making to these new founders, is that like stuff like this happens. Like a lot of the time when you're just getting started, like you may think that you've scoped out the product right. You may think that you have allocated enough resources to it, but at the end, like it all comes down to like, it is what it is. And now you've got to push through it and come up with a way to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I think that's a super important point for
I
these
don't think
listeners to
it's
understand.
uncommon for a software company to grow to a certain point and then realize, okay, we need to change the way a lot of our app works. And you have to make that decision. Do we scrap what we have and rebuild? Do we try to build pieces of it and add to what we have? We had a very similar situation at HubSpot long before the IPO, or not too long before the IPO. And they scrapped a whole lot of functionalities. We ended up acquiring a company. That company was called Performable, run by a guy named David Cancel, who's an 8-time software founder. And he took over the product org. So it was, and we were doing 100 million, 80 million at that point in revenue. And so that was not a painless process either. So much happier to be doing it at 4 million than 80. And so, it's not uncommon for engineering orgs to need to be rethought. And some people, have to move on, and new people need to be brought in, and new processes need to be adapted. It's very common, I think, in software companies. Either that, or they just kind of live with the legacy of what they built and build something new.
Different. Well, that was the next thing. It's like for a lot of these founders, if they get to 6 months and they're expecting to be done and they're completely out of runway, it's like, what do they do? Were you guys just like, oh no, like we're too deep, we've just got to finish it? Was that kind of like the mindset?
Yeah, so we fortunately, I kind of have a bootstrappers mentality. My first company was pretty much bootstrapped. And then at HubSpot, it wasn't bootstrapped at all, right? We raised 100 million before going public. But my team at HubSpot was pretty bootstrapped, I like to say. Yeah. The only resources they ever gave me was salespeople.
Work, man. Oh,
and I ran the sales org, but we rarely invested. We didn't invest much in marketing to help build the portion of the business that I built or in service, et cetera. And so, in fact, they invested less in the service org in my part of the business than the rest by a half. So at Databox, we had some money left in the bank, not a lot, and then I raised, like as I mentioned, 1.1 million more. About 2 years ago, we got to break even. The plan was always to keep costs low and figure out the business. And we did that about 2 years ago, and it kind of just felt really good. So we've stuck with that, where we've been running at a break-even rate. I have done a revenue-based loan, which has gotten a lot more common for SaaS companies these days. But we're paying that off based off of cash flow. It's almost paid off at this point. Oh, wow. And so we're running on our own steam. We're growing. We grew 38% year over year last year. And actually made profit last year.
So are you guys, I mean, obviously there's a weird point to decide like, okay, we want to maybe take the company to the next levels when you go and get more fundraising. Is that something you guys have looked at, or are you guys just going to continue just cash flow because you guys are already positive?
Yeah. So I almost want to both options are on the table. What's that?
Oh, I was going to say, I almost want to re-ask that for all these people who are just getting started. It's like, when do you know that it's time to actually go raise funding versus, I don't know, like you guys did, take out just like a normal conventional like business loan, which I assume most people listening don't have that option.
Yeah, so we did not take a conventional business loan, just to be real clear. So conventional business loans are difficult to get for software companies because you don't really have any assets. People don't really understand a subscription business. A lot of your contracts in SaaS are month to month. And so very difficult to get a loan from a bank, which is stupid, but we'll put that aside. But there are lots and lots of companies, and this is new, maybe in the last 2 years. There's been some companies that do this for a while, but it's like now there's probably like 20 options out there for a SaaS company to go and get what's called a revenue-based loan. And they do some math based off of your growth rate, your monthly revenue, and your cancellation or your churn rate. And they'll say, all right, it's really reasonable to give these guys $500,000 or give these guys $100,000, give these guys $2 million based off of those numbers. And you'll give you that just like a regular loan. And then instead of paying it off at a fixed amount per month, it's a percentage of the amount of cash you bring in the door that month.
Got it.
And
that
that's
makes
how
sense.
it's paid off. So I think that for most SaaS companies, you invest a lot in sales and marketing in order to grow faster, in order to capitalize on the total addressable market before your competitors do. And you usually, since you're charging month to month or maybe annually for some customers, you typically pay more in sales and marketing than you do get back in that first month or even maybe in that first year. And so that's the rationale of why SaaS companies often raise money. Our payback is actually really good. Our lifetime value to customer acquisition cost ranges between around 4 and 5, which is not amazing, but good for a company that sells to SMBs, small businesses. And our payback period is like 60 days, which is really good.
Wow.
Meaning
really good.
when I make an investment in sales and marketing, I get that back in 60 days. So I'm
Whatever
able to
your
do that
CAC
off
is,
like cash flow.
Yeah. So whatever your CAC is or which is your customer acquisition cost to when that's paid off is 60 days.
Yeah, exactly. It's like 2 months worth of pay.
That's awesome.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so we've invested a lot in what I would call low CAC or low customer acquisition cost sales and marketing tactics. So one of them is having a freemium model where you give away something. So it really helps to get more people to try your product based off of the marketing that you do. We don't do any paid ads. We do all content marketing. We've gotten that to the point where we get about 4,500 signups a month from the website. We also work with agencies who then introduce Databox to their clients. So that keeps, once they're trained, that keeps the cost really low for us for both sales and onboarding of those clients, and increases, the revenue we get per agency. And so there's a bunch of these things that we've done that keep that cost way down, which allows us to invest in growth, but in a reasonable manner. So to answer your question, I don't need to raise money. I think we can build the business without it. There might be a point where we're growing so fast that I need people. I can't wait to like hire someone and get them trained for say account management roles or sales roles or more advanced roles, in which case I would probably go and raise some money in order to hire more people quickly.
To build workforce.
That is my thinking right now as well. And it's a very fortunate position. It's very rare for a SaaS company to get there. I wouldn't say I figured it all out, but some dumb luck. But that's where we're at. So yeah, I joke and say when a great venture capital firm comes and offers a great term sheet, I'll take the money. But I rarely take their calls at this point. So.
That's a good spot to be in. Right there.
Yes, good spot to be in.
Well, and I think it does bring up like a good point too. Like when I think a lot of people try and go a little too early and seek VC funding, whereas you and the majority of the companies who need it are more established, have the revenue, have the customers, have done the validation, and really the money is for growth and hopefully more for growth and less about extending runway.
Yeah, I think it's easier it's gotten easier to launch a tech company, a SaaS company. There's a company I know, it's one guy doing nearly $1 million in revenue, a SaaS company, and so I know another one with like a team of 11 doing like 3 million. So all bootstrapped, completely bootstrapped. So I think it's actually, especially if you're on the technical side and you can actually code, and if you're a full stack engineer, like you should just go start something and not worry about money and get your first free customers as long as you're comfortable talking to people over Zoom. And so that's what I recommend. I think the hard part is going from say 1 million to 100 million. That's when it gets really crowded. As soon as there's a real market there's going to be 10 competitors. You have these competitors with literally 20x valuations entering new markets, which could be yours, and that are public companies. And so there's just competition from everywhere once you validate a market. And so I think that, and everybody's fighting for attention, not just your direct competitors, but companies that are like you or competing for search rankings, competing for keywords when you're bidding or when advertising. So it's really hard to, I think, scale these days.
Yeah. How did COVID affect you and your team just in general?
Yeah, you said Zoom, right? So I'm curious on that, like the COVID pivot that you guys had to do.
Yeah, so there was a period of time where I thought we were going to go out of business, like everybody else, I think, at least for like a week or two. Yeah, so Q1 last year was fine, which is kind of, Q2 or the end of Q1 is when everybody in the US realized that we weren't going to be immune to COVID like we had hoped. And most of our businesses in the US and Western Europe. And so Q1 is when I started to see the impact of cancellations, customers canceling. Our sales started to slow a little bit. And so I think it was April where our sales were awful and our cancellations was awful. And we went backwards. It's the first month where we ever dropped revenue. However, when I looked at that quarter, we grew by 20 MRR. So MRR, for people who don't know, is monthly recurring revenue. So for a company doing several 100,000 MRR, changing by 20 is a really weird, crazy, good result. Q3, though, we actually made up for that lost momentum. And if I plotted Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, it would actually be a perfect line. But with Q1 being down and Q3 being up, Q4 kind of came back to our normal growth curve. So there was a time when the sky was falling, but we ended up, very good for the year in terms of growth. We grew about 38% year over year. And I kept my head count pretty much flat because I was concerned what was going to happen.
That's awesome.
Next.
So let's talk about like any big pivots. I mean, whether it's COVID or just kind of pivots in the company, what experiences have you had on making those pivots and what that process was slightly like?
The big pivot we went through is about 6 months to maybe about a year ago when we realized that we would need to build a bigger sales and support team. It's now sales and support and marketing is about a little less than 2/3 of our headcount at this point, whereas before it was probably about a third and the product org was much bigger. A lot of our customers buy without talking to us on a Zoom call, at least. We had hoped we could scale that, but just after digging in, realized that it would be a struggle to do that. So I'd say that was the big one. So we built out a model and over time figured out the productivity of the people and figured out our return on that, and kind of built out a model that predicts all the way down to the P&L, how much we'll spend and how much we'll make and all of that. So that was the first one. I think we're probably coming up on another big pivot as we finish up this big project where we're moving from a platform where people primarily use us to report results to someone else, and they're just reporting generally high-level metrics. It's like reporting to your boss. You're not going to give them all the detail, just like the high-level metrics. Or reporting, in the case of marketing agencies, reporting to clients. You're not going to show them how the sausage is made, just that you did this work and you got this result. And we're moving to a model where it's a little bit more of a business intelligence tool, where we're pulling in a whole lot more data from the different tools that you use, helping you manipulate that, and then analyze that in lots of different ways. So that's our next big pivot. We're about to launch the functionality. We're about to change our pricing, packaging in order to encourage usage like that. And then, of course, we'll change our positioning and our sales process and all that. So we're in the middle of that one. I rarely think pivots are quick. They usually, the way I look at it is like every year there's 2 or 3 big things you can take on. And then this pivot is the big one, and it'll probably span into next year as well.
Yeah.
From talking to you, you've had experience in all sorts of different things. If you could go like all the way back and change one thing, or really just kind of like reflect on one thing and basically tell our listeners that piece of advice that you learned from it, what would be that thing you would go back and do differently?
I would probably invest more in product management. And I'd still like to invest more in product management. I think we're great, like as I mentioned earlier, we're top notch at gathering feedback and prioritizing based off of customer feedback. But I think there's a missing component that a great product manager does of having conversations with users and prospects, really understanding why they do things, but especially why they don't do things in your app, because you can't measure that in any other way other than conversations. And then devising solutions and validating them before you start coding. I would say that is an area of improvement for us and something that I wished we did earlier. In the early times when I was the one doing the selling and doing the marketing and being involved in onboarding, I was kind of serving in that function. But as we built up those orgs and had those functions be separate, those teams became kind of islands. without a lot of, one-on-one interaction. And so I feel like our product management misses that process. And so I think companies that are a little later stage than us, have a handful of product managers, and they're constantly talking to customers in addition to other things, of course, but and really validating and coming up with ideas and validating ideas and all of that. So I would not skip or skimp on that.
That's such good advice. It kind of caught me off guard. Honestly, wasn't expecting that, but that's amazing to know. Like, listen, if we can communicate and move forward, you're going to see a huge result. One thing our listeners love to hear, and I know it's a sad part, but tell me about a failure that you had, and to follow up with that, how did that failure affect you, and why did you not allow? What steps did you take to make sure that didn't kill the business? I guess is the best way.
Yeah, and so you probably want it in the context of Databox, huh?
It doesn't have to be. It honestly doesn't have to be Databox.
Okay.
I mean, these guys are all founders who
yeah. Well, I could give you like 100 from my first startup. It's a little easier, and I'm probably not aware of all the mistakes I've made or have made at Databox or are making at Databox. But so because I haven't, we have our own issues and weaknesses. We've done a SWOT analysis, but I don't feel like I'm missing them. Like I don't feel like I'm making the mistake out of ignorance.
Let's talk about that first company.
So that first company, I can start with the name. The name was awful. It was called WizSpark, WHIZSPARK. I remember going to a trade show, which was silly, we were at a trade show, but we were at a trade show, and some guy that ran a local agency stopped by, and he's like, WizSpark, and he just started laughing, and like, I spent money to be there, and like the guy was just totally rude. I'm like, "What are you laughing at?" He's like, "If you don't know, it's too late for you."
What? Oh my god!
Yeah. I later found out what he was laughing at was their name. I never really thought critically about it until like 3 years into the business, where like somebody's like, "Are you talking about peeing or about being smart?" I'm like, "Oh, I'd never even thought that somebody would think that we were talking about peeing." And then it was like, the question I had to get on a phone call: is it WizPark or WizSpark? Like, because Z and S stick together, so don't make those mistakes. That was one. There's some ones that are a little touchy. Like, make sure you vet your investors out really well if you're going to take money, especially if it's from friends and family.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah.
Number 3 would be, not no one, but very few people knew this back then. But like, find things that are scalable at some point. Like it doesn't. I like to say do things. I buy into the do things that don't scale when you're getting started out, when you have some time. But we were in constant mode of like adding features to our product in order to find that next thing that was going to help us grow our business. And every new idea, we felt like, oh, this is the one. Or like we would seek out like a partnership and like, we just need that partnership, or we need that customer, and then everyone's going to work with us. That stuff doesn't work to scale. You got to find something that's repeatable without getting lucky, right? You find a value prop that lots of people can relate to instantly. Even enter an established market so that people recognize what you're doing before you do that crazy idea. Like, there's a lot of things that I would do differently in terms of thinking about how to scale something.
So in general, what's a piece of advice that you would want to give everybody just getting started in tech, other than everything you mentioned?
There's a lot of great books out there now. And so I wouldn't start a SaaS company without reading a certain number of books. I think I would start with these days, I would start with Wes Schaefer's book, Product-Led Growth. That's a really good one. I think if you're building a software company and you're not thinking about how the product can ultimately sell itself, then you're not going to be able to compete, especially in the long run. Maybe not be the first thing you do for your first 10 customers, but you got to think about product-led growth. I would take a look at Predictable Revenue. It's kind of a classic, but also look at a few other sales books. If you don't have a sales background, that's going to be really important. Even if you have a low price product, you got to make those initial sales yourself. If you're scaling up your sales org, look at my old boss's book, The Sales Acceleration Formula. Really breaks down the science of building out sales. I think you have to be doing content marketing. So whether you pick up inbound marketing or any of the best rated books on content marketing and SEO. I think that's pretty important. There's probably like 10 more that I'd recommend, but those are a good start.
No, that's awesome. We'll put all those books kind of in the show notes, so our listeners can kind of go back and look up those ones. I think I mean, you see these people that have done it before, and I think that's why these people like to listen, right? We like to listen because we're in these stages. You've been in the stage that these people were in before, and so if you knew what was in these books beforehand, would have made your life easier.
Yes, would have been hard because they weren't written yet. But yes, but yeah, actually, I listen to probably 2 podcasts a day. Taking the dogs for a walk or doing my exercise. I was making fun of myself earlier. I probably buy 3 or 4 books a month. I don't read 3 or 4 books a month, but I think that's okay. I certainly skim them, or I'll listen to part of it on Audible and enough to get some takeaways or to make a recommendation to someone on my team to read it more thoroughly or whatever. So I think it's important to always be learning. The thing about SaaS is that, there's principles to it that have been proven, but it's also evolving quite rapidly still. I think the business models that worked 10 years ago, and the go-to-market models that worked 10 years ago are not the right ones now, and won't be the right ones in a few years either.
Well, Peter, thanks for jumping on with us. This was super fun. Yeah. I think the perspective of the life of what it's like to run a big tech company is different, right? I think a lot of people who are just getting started, I think their minds are going to be like blown, like, oh man, I couldn't even imagine half of these problems and what I would do in these situations. But that's okay, because these guys are just getting started, and it's good food for thought. Like I think they can start thinking about these problems early on versus trying to cross that bridge when they get there. So really enjoyed.
Yeah, and like I said, I think I would encourage everybody to start something. I think it's the only true path to independence is building your own business. And I think we'll look back 10 years from now and say, oh my God, how amazing it was to be an entrepreneur in the last few years. So go for it.